Hey, folks. There's actually a couple people in here. Or there was somebody in here. Awesome. Well, for those of you who are catching this live, welcome. For those of you who are not catching this live, anyone who checks out the video later, also welcome. In this, I'm just going to be going through this solo RPG that I've been making, basically, and it's mostly for me. I'm just kind of putting this together for my own interests. Building an RPG, and kind of coming at it from the ground up. I've been doing some work on this over on my Substack, and so I've done some posts on there. Oh, awesome. Great. That's great, Foxoff. Yeah, glad you could jump in for a minute here. I'm probably only going to be going for about an hour, or maybe an hour and a half, so it's not going to be like all day by any means. I might go a little longer than that, but we'll see. But I'm probably going to just be going for a bit. But yeah, for sure, check out the video later, because I'll hopefully do a little bit of work on it and go through the principles. So again, for those of you who are watching not live, it looks like there's a couple people here. Hey, everybody. I'm going to go through briefly what I've done so far in this RPG, what the goal of it is, and then talk about some of the mechanics that I'm putting together. And again, I've detailed a lot of this in my blog, which you guys can go check out, where I go through basically different, what would you say, different sections. There's one where I go through the aims of it. There's another one where I go through kind of different mechanics and things like that. But to start off, I wanted to talk about why I'm creating my own solo RPG, and I think there's a couple reasons. First of all, I think everybody should, at some point, design a game. Hey, John Franco. Hey, Russell. But I think everybody should design their own game. Not for production necessarily, but because I think it really helps with the overall effort of being a GM. You start to see behind the scenes a bit, and it makes it a lot easier to do things like convert games, convert adventures, if you can start to get into the nuts and bolts of how a game is designed. So I know a lot of GMs just want to, run games. That's totally fine. But I do think there's something cool about designing your own, because you do have to think about those things. And then once you start to think about those things, again, there's a lot of practice that then you can apply elsewhere. First of all, I should make sure, am I coming through okay? Those of you who are here and are watching, can you guys hear me all fine? There's some background noise, so I'm using an audio dampener. So I don't know if I'm quieter than usual or if, I don't know what's going on there exactly. I can see that it looks like my mix is coming through, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys can all hear me. I don't want to record like half of this and then realize it was super watery or washed out or you couldn't hear me at all. That would be very frustrating. So yeah, let me know if you guys can, those of you who are here. So that's why one of the reasons why I want to make my own game. Oh, thanks, Mark. Awesome, I appreciate that. Okay, one of the reasons is because I think it's good for everybody to do it. Another is because I've looked around at a lot of the different RPGs out there, a lot of the solo games out there, and I've been less than impressed. Well, I shouldn't say I'm less than impressed. They do some things really, really well. The one that has been often recommended to me is 4 Against Darkness. I've seen a number of other solo games out there that all seem really cool. They have great procedures for creating dungeons. But I really like combat, and I've been a little underwhelmed by a lot of the combat simulators in those solo RPGs. And so I wanted to make one that had a much more, I think, robust combat game. And basically, instead of creating a dungeon crawler, although I do want to have dungeon crawling elements, and maybe have it be a dungeon crawler primarily, I want it to be more or less like a series of combats that are kind of escalating. So it's sort of like a solo build game. That's how I'm thinking about it, where you choose different starting packages or you build your own, right? Take this sort of weapon or that sort of weapon, put these sorts of points into this ability and put this much into magic, and then see how far you can get with that. And so I'm totally okay with certain things being broken because it's a solo game, right? And there's no like leaderboard or anything like that. So I'm okay with certain builds being broken because, you can kind of just keep going with a particular build and see how far you can get, even if it's a broken one. And so how many goblins can I kill, right? How many orcs can I kill? And keep on adding to it and seeing how far you can go. So that's kind of what I'm doing with it. And so far what I've developed, I've run a few games with just on my own, and it's been super fun. So I want to build it out more, because right now all I have really worked out is sort of the, you might say, melee heavy build, melee heavy focus. There's a lot of different ways to go with that, but it works fine. The basic mechanic is great. So anyway, that's what I'm going to be doing in this, is kind of developing on that, building on top of that, and maybe going into magic a little bit, maybe going into other areas that I haven't tackled so much, and hopefully getting some ideas from anybody who's here watching as we go through. Things that I'm not so interested in. I'm not so interested in journaling or like narrative solo gaming. I think that would be fairly easy to come up with just on the fly. You know, you don't really need a lot of rules for that. So I'm not as worried about, I'm not as worried about coming up with rules for how to journal events or, you know, what to narrate. That's just less interesting to me. So what I did with the first one was I wanted to come up with a basic resolution mechanic, and it's a very simple mechanic. I don't want to do a D20 game. I want to use a D6 because I have tons of sets of D6 from my 40K days. And so I really wanted to, use those. So it's a D6 mechanic. And one of the things that came to mind when I thought of D6 mechanics was the game Arkham Horror, like the first edition or the second edition of that board game. It used a D6 in all of its resolutions as well. It had abilities, and then you would roll a D6. And success was either a 5 or a 6. So you had a 1 1/3 base chance of succeeding on a task. And that's super simple. You just roll a D6, you have a 1 in 3 chance of succeeding. And that's if you just have a base ability. But for every extra ability point you had, you added more dice. And mostly the goal was still to get a 5 or a 6. So that means most of the time, you know, if you have 2 dice, if your ability is at 2, you're rolling 2 dice trying to get 1, 5, or 6, you have about a 50% chance or so to succeed. It's like 54% or something like that. And then it increases from there. And so you can really have a pretty robust set of statistics or set of odds based on how many D6s you're rolling. And then there's a number of cool ways you can modify that. A lot of cool design space there, because you can make, you know, advantage, disadvantage be succeed on a 4, 5, or 6, or only succeed on a 6. And then you can increase the number of successes that are needed, right? So 2 successes or 3 successes, and that changes the odds dramatically too. So when you're talking about a monster game, right, and you think of success as hitting the enemy, there are lots of ways of modifying that. Monsters can have more successes that are needed. They can impose disadvantage on your rolls. There's lots of things that they can do to manipulate the dice. And so you can have a cool monster variety within that basic mechanic. It's also useful for outside of combat mechanics, right? You can get a lot of really cool outside of combat things, I think. Because it's fairly easy to just, you know, do a breakdown a door test. It's a D6 plus, or you know, how many successes do you need? And if you have a strength stat of like 3, well, then you're going to roll 3 D6s. You just got to get a 5 or a 6 to break through. So it's a very easy mechanic to think through. So again, the basic idea of the system is that tests will be resolved by rolling a number of D6s equal to 1 plus the relevant ability. So that's the base. You're always going to get at least 1 die. And then at least 1 success is needed, and a success is either a 5 or a 6. Again, advantages, success is 4 through 6, disadvantages, success is 6. And regular tests need 1, hard need 2, and extremely hard need 3. And for those sorts of tests, right, you're usually going to be doing things that, if it's a really hard test that you have to succeed all at once, or an extremely hard test or a hard test, then it's not the sort of thing you would put right in the path of the player. Again, there's some interesting design space here, I think. You can have these really cool, like, you know, if you think of it as a dungeon, the secret door can only be found with a, you know, 2 success roll. So if you have a pretty low, whatever ability controls finding secret doors, if you have a pretty low ability there, you just can't find the secret door. I don't know. I think that's kind of cool. So have like these sort of paths you can find. So that's the sort of base mechanic. And again, I think it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. A 1 in 3 chance of success is your base. That's the standard chance. If it's a really hard test or you have disadvantage, then it's a 1 in 6. And that's, I mean, you know, again, if you compare that to a D20 system, it's a fairly easy comparison, fairly good comparison. A 1 in 6 chance is like a what? On a D20, a DC 15 or 18 or something like that. Somewhere around there. So it's fairly comparable. When you're looking at the kinds of abilities. So I didn't want to do a whole bunch of abilities. I didn't want to do 6 abilities. I think I really only wanted to do like 1 or 2. I ended up doing 3. But just a few abilities, at least in my mind, really, really focuses the game. I don't want it to be like, you know, well, I didn't want to do the 6 base ones. So what I did was I went with 2 abilities that are primary, brawn and wit. And brawn is essentially physical. It's all the physical abilities. So it's strength, dexterity, and constitution. Whereas wit is intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, or, you know, those sorts of abilities. One of the things that always bothered me in RPGs really is that the big guy, the strong guy, is very often slow. And I understand that that's sort of an archetype, but that's, I think of Conan the Barbarian. I don't think of a slow guy. Right? It's definitely not how I think about him. Hey, DG. How you doing, man? Good to see you. So anyway, I wanted to combine those. And one of the things that people mention when I mention this is, well, what if you want to play the thiefy type? Right? What if you do want to play the kind of the sneaky thief? And so that's why I added a third ability, finesse. But finesse is not agility. Finesse is expertise. So if you're talking about tumbling or like crossing a tightrope, that's still going to be a brawn check, basically, is what I was thinking. It's still about your physical prowess. Oh, awesome. That's great. Like I was saying at the start of the video, I think everybody should try their own solo game, make their own solo game, or make their own RPG. It doesn't have to be solo, but I think everybody should try to make their own RPG at some point. Because it really forces you to start thinking about mechanics in an interesting way. I shouldn't say everybody. Every GM should create a game. Because it really does help, again, force you to think about mechanics. And that's really helpful in designing your own adventures and in transferring your own adventures and doing all that. So, yeah. So anyway, we have brawn and wit. Brawn is going to be mostly about physical combat. It's going to include health. And then wit is going to be for magic. Yeah, that's what wit's going to be. It's the wit. And I liked the use of those words. I think they actually capture a better spectrum than simply strength or intelligence or something like that. And again, I go into the details of all my thought process on the blog, so you guys can check that out if you're interested in some of the details there. Great, Aries, I'm glad. Oh, that's awesome. That's a great one, DG. That sounds super fun. Okay, so finesse is, as I said, it's about expertise, it's about training, it's about preparation. So if you put a lot into finesse, if you're doing a finesse quote unquote build, then you're going to be more about training and preparation, mastery, expertise, the sort of thing that you would get from a guy who's had a long experience of or has done a lot of previous kind of adventuring work, you might say. He's more of the adventuring type, quote unquote, thiefy. In one sense. So finesse, and the way that this works is you're going to have two base kinds of checks. You're going to have brawn checks or wit checks. And so something like picking a lock will be a wit check. Something like breaking down a door would be a brawn check. But finesse is added to both. So whatever points you put into finesse, it applies to every kind of outside of combat check. Whereas brawn is mostly a combat ability, and so it has some outside of combat ability, but it's not focused on that. It's only going to apply to half of the outside of combat stuff. And wit is a magic ability. It's the thing that's going to focus on magic and resistance to magic and maybe sanity if I end up adding that in. And so then that only also has a few applications outside of combat. Whereas finesse does some things in combat, but mostly it's going to be sort of the catch-all outside of combat training thing. Anyway, I think that's kind of an elegant solution. I like that. So finesse doesn't have its own category of checks. Picking a lock isn't a finesse check. Picking a lock is a wit check. Finesse would add to it, though. And the same thing is true for, again, breaking down a door. Because, you might think breaking down a door is just all about brute strength, but I don't know. I imagine there's actually some actual, finesse involved there. Like, you got to know where to hit it. Like, what kind of doors. Oh, this is this kind of door, and the hinges are on this side, so I'm going to break through it this way. So finesse would make sense to contribute there too. Yeah, exactly, DG. And it'll also add to some things in combat, but the base idea right now is that you have three abilities: brawn, wit, and finesse. There are only two kinds of tests, brawn and wit tests, and finesse is added to both. And if you just look at those three, then it seems like finesse is really, really strong, right? Finesse is really, really the best. But of course, as I said, brawn is going to be the combat ability, and wit is going to be the magic ability. So once you start to get into those, then finesse will kind of become less and less important. For right now, when you just look at the abilities, the skills, quote unquote, then finesse is obviously the most important. Because brawn is going to be adding hit points and attack dice. Wit is going to be about mental resistance and spellcasting. Now, one thing that's hopefully clear at this point, is I'm going to do a classless system. It's going to be based entirely on the ability points you spend and the equipment that you take. So you can do any kind of combination of finesse, wit, and brawn Wit points are going to give you access to spells. Finesse points are going to give you access to obviously skills, basically, and also some sort of combat maneuver things. And then brawn is just hit points and damage. So you can build any particular blend of those three, as well as the kinds of equipment you're going to get, which will also change it. So I think it's actually a really cool system. And again, so far it's been super fun in my own like playtesting of it, just like playing it on my own. It's been super fun. I haven't done any magic yet, so I can't say how that will be, but certainly the actual strength, the physical stuff is going to be really cool. Okay, so this is the first blog where I go through that stuff. Just talk about the different checks. You guys can look at it. And, but I'm going to go to the second one too, which is where I talk about combat and also go through some of the statistics, because I think this is also useful to know. So combat is the same mechanic. I want to use a whole bunch of d6s. I don't want to roll one d6 at a time. That's boring to me. That's why I actually I tried 4 Against Darkness, and I was just kind of bored by combat because there's just one d6 at a time, and I want to roll just a ton. So I want combat to have a bunch of d6s. You're rolling handfuls of dice, a dice pool, as opposed to just one die at a time. Yeah, exactly, DG, and that's what I want to add in, because once you do this base system, once I build the base system, then I can start adding things like talents and feats, maybe even feat trees, talent trees. I mean, you could make this as complex as you wanted based on that very simple, basic system, which is really cool, right? I love systems that are easy to learn and involve a lot of mastery, right? Like that's the kind of the highlight, where to actually build a perfect thing involves a lot of work and trying different things and looking through the options. But the basic mechanic is easy. It's one of the reasons I actually bounced off Pathfinder. I bounced off Pathfinder because Pathfinder 2nd edition, because I found it wasn't easy to get into initially. I saw that it did have that sort of branching path and build, which I really like, but I bounced off the initial playing of it because I was like, I can't get a playable build that's fun right initially. I can see that if I play this a lot, I will get there, but it's not where I started, so I kind of bounced off of it. So I want this to be very easy to start, very easy to approach, and then you go, oh, I see. If I combine this talent with this weapon, then I have this, and I use this array of abilities, then I can do this sort of thing, and that will get me past a lot more of the dungeon than I was previously able to get through. So you kind of like push and push and push using those builds. I think it's actually really cool. Yeah, I think classless systems are great. I love classless systems where it's skills and equipment. Skills and equipment. That's always the way to go. I like classes. That's fun too, but classless systems are fun. Okay, so the basic attack roll is going to be, I want to roll a bunch of d6s. So you're going to get one die as a base attack. So everybody, regardless of your abilities or your weapons, just gets one die. And then you add in brawn. You get more dice equal to brawn. So you're building up an attack dice pool, and it starts off with 1 plus brawn. So if your brawn is 2, then you're going to have 3 dice so far. Hope that makes sense. It's pretty straightforward. And then weapons will add additional dice. So there are going to be certain kinds of weapons, and the different like you might say light, medium, or heavy, or something like that. And then you add those in, and so you get base attack, brawn, and weapons. Now, one thing I don't want to do is add finesse to attack rolls. So finesse adds to non-combat tests. It doesn't add to the attack pool. Now, that might sound weird. Like, how does finesse not matter in combat? It does. It's just going to matter in a different way. It's going to be more about what I'm going to call maneuvers later. So it actually does do things in combat. It just doesn't directly add to the attack roll. That's about brawn, the weapon choice, and your base attack. And then like maybe magic or something like that might affect this too. But the idea is you're getting a bunch of dice. Yeah, and here's the thing, DG. I actually have tons and tons and tons of different dice. So I actually can use different dice for different things. So I can have a brawn pool, and I can have a finesse pool, and I can have a magic pool, and I can have a base attack die, and I can have a weapon dice, because I have so many different sets of d6s that I can actually have the physical dice look different. So when I put them together in different combinations, I know what's what. Now, not everybody's going to have that, but you don't need to have them from different sources. That's just what I have. Yeah, exactly, DG. That's a good way of putting it. Exactly. It's not how deep you stick the blade. It's how you get the blade around that bloody guard. That's a good way of putting it. I like that. I'm going to steal that. When people ask about that, I'm going to steal that. So, but the nice thing about this is, if you don't have any brawn, if you're just like you're doing a finesse build and you take a medium-sized weapon, say, that's still 3 dice. That's still 3 dice. And if you look at the odds, which I go into here in a bit, here are the odds of getting a success with dice numbering between 1 and 7. So if you're trying to get 1 hit in, what are the odds? Well, if you have 1 die, it's a 1 in 3. If you have 2 dice, it's about 1 half. If you have 3 dice, it's about 3/4. It's about 71%, almost 3/4. And so that means if you're just building a finesse build, well, you're probably going to get a hit every round. And I wanted that. I don't like missing. Missing is boring, right? Missing is boring. So it's fine if you don't hit very hard, but I wanted the balance to be on hitting more often than not. And so if you just come at it with a basic weapon, pretty basic weapon, medium size, you might say, then even if you don't have brawn, you're still attacking with 3 dice. So I think that's cool. That's cool. But if you have lots of brawn and a heavy weapon, you might be attacking with 6 or 7, right? And then you're much more likely to not just get 1 hit every round, but many hits. So far, the balance between high brawn and low brawn is not the difference between success and failure. It's the difference between much more success or less success. And that means you can use finesse to bolster that lower success rate and use a different build. I think it's really cool. So that's the basic math. Right, exactly, DG. That's true. That's true. In this, I didn't have like a miss system. So and obviously missing is still possible. You can still miss with 7 attack dice. You just roll any 5s or 6s. That happens. It's a 0.03% chance. Or no, it's a 3% chance. Yeah, 0.3%. It's a 3% chance. Yeah, exactly. It's better if they have consequences in more than a useless round. I agree. Now, what's interesting is if you add disadvantage, the odds change dramatically. Here, I don't know if you can see this, but the odds are dramatically different if you only succeed on a 6. So if the creature, if whatever creature you're fighting says attacks against this creature have disadvantage, then your odds go way down. Even if you have 7 attack dice, you're still only about 73% likely to get a hit. That's, a quarter chance to miss with 7 dice. That's not likely, but it's still fairly likely. So disadvantage is a very powerful tool for creatures to have, a very powerful defense. So at first I thought that a lot of creatures would have it, but when I did the math, I was like, wait, no way. Disadvantage is something that very interesting, dangerous creatures should be able to impose. Maybe not even for a whole fight, maybe just for certain rounds of combat or something like that. Because that's a heady tool, as I say. But instead, you can give creatures defense rolls. This is what the other way of doing it. This is what I got from Hero Quest. So Hero Quest it's a really fast combat game. You actually roll battles really quickly. But the creatures, both attackers and defenders, or both monsters and heroes, get defense dice. And for monsters, that defense dice is just, if they get a 6, they cancel one of the hits you imposed. And not all creatures are going to have defense dice. Again, it's going to be a special thing. I want players to be kind of wading through monsters, like cutting through lots of monsters. That's what I want. And so by putting only some creatures get some defense dice, that means that they can essentially just kick back a little bit. Exactly, the most cracking tabletop game in the world. Exactly, DG. It's a cracking game. It's the best thing about Hero Quest is the inside of the box. But no, it's a great combat game. It's the one I started with, so that's why I'm kind of building it that way. So instead of imposing disadvantage to defend themselves, creatures will instead have more or less hit points and more or less defense dice. And sometimes they might be able to impose disadvantage. Very, very dangerous creatures, or like ghosts, or like some kind of oozes or something might impose disadvantage, right? Things like that, where it's really hard to get a good solid hit in. Yeah, what's funny, DG, is that I think it was only the British version of Hero Quest that gave all the creatures 1 hit point, because in the American version of Hero Quest, lots of creatures had more than 1 hit point. And I think that was fascinating, that it was a big difference between the British version and the American one. By the time it came out in America, they had changed that, so that I think a lot of, like, mummies have like 2 or 3, Chaos Warriors had like 3 or 4, the Gargoyle had like 3 or 4. Yeah, they changed it a bit. Yeah, that's right. The British and the German went. Yeah, that's right. Okay, and then again, adding multiple hit points essentially changes the odds so that you need multiple successes. And then here's the math for that. So if you need 2 successes, if you need 2 hits to kill a creature, then what are the odds of killing them in 1 round? Well, obviously, if you have 1 die, you can't kill a creature with 2 hit points in 1 round. If you have 2, it's about 1 in 10, 3 is about 1 in 4, etc. So I did the math on this, and it actually has a really cool range. So again, there's a lot of monster variety you can add in with 3 levers. You can change hit points, you can change defense dice, and you can impose disadvantage. But there's actually another way that I develop later, and that's armor. So there's actually 4 ways of making monsters unique. Besides also changing individual special abilities and changing individual attack numbers. So you can make a lot of variety of monsters by using these 3 or 4 levers. And that's what I want, right? If I want a combat game, I want good variety in the monsters I'm facing. That means you got to have some different levers to make them interesting. And these are different ways of doing that. So more hit points, higher defense dice, imposing disadvantage, or more armor. Okay, so defense is pretty easy. Now, enemies. No, so I'm changing that, Frederick. Essentially, armor is going to be a secondary set of hit points. It's going to be armor points and hit points. Essentially, so it's like temporary hit points. The idea is going to be that armor. That's right, Crow. Awesome. Glad you make it. The idea is going to be that armor basically serves as a second pool of hit points, but that some monsters do direct damage and some kinds of damage skip armor. And some kinds of attacks deal more damage to armor or hit points, vice versa. So it's another lever to turn, right? So if you have 5 hit points and 6 armor points, well, maybe the vampire does direct damage. So he's super spooky, right? Because he's going to skip your armor. He's just going to go right to your hit points. Whereas a normal goblin is going to be stabbing you. He's going to be going through your armor first. So, that's one consideration there. Poison, fall damage, some kinds of traps or spells can do direct damage. And the same thing is true for enemies, right? That some enemies might have 1 armor or 2 armor or 3 armor or something like that. But you might have attacks that can skip armor. Certain kinds of finesse attacks, for example, might be able to skip armor. And therefore, even though you have fewer dice, you can use that finesse attack to go whoop, right to the 1 hit point the guy has. 1 hit point, but 10 armor. A plate armored goblin, right? And you use that finesse to go right to his hit points and kill him in 1 attack. So it's another lever you can use, in other words, to make the fights more interesting. So armor is another thing there that I wanted to do. And the nice thing is, I'm going through all of this, but when you actually write this down, it's super easy. A monster stat block is hit points, X, AP, X, attack dice, X, defense dice, X, special ability if they have it. And that's it. That's the whole stat block. Yeah, DG. So when it comes to magic, that was what I was thinking, is that you're going to be using dice to power your spells. And one of the kind of like easy spells, it's like the throwaway spells, is either magic missile or magic shield. And you can use any die to just deal 1 damage with magic, or use any die to just block 1 automatic with magic shield or magic armor. So exactly, you use a spell, it's a quick spell, you cast it off. It's not the most efficient use of that die, but it's an automatic, reliable use. You can always block a damage with magic, and you can always deal 1 damage with magic. So yeah, absolutely. I'm going to turn to magic later when I'm actually, because I haven't actually figured it out, but I'm writing that down because that's a great idea. Magic shield. I should probably do a second document here. Here we go. Okay, so these are just notes, basically. I should put that down, random notes. So let's see, magic heading. And then we'll do magic shield, auto blocks 1 hit. Something like that. Yeah, something like that. Hey, Elphammer. Just going through, I'm just going through my solo RPG. Going to be developing. I've already gone through the basic stuff here, so if you want to catch some of that, you can either go to my blog or watch the first part of the video. But I'm about to turn to some of the extra stuff, which I think is super cool, which is the weapons and armor and how that works. I'm super, super into it. Yeah, that's right, DG. I will pay you in praise, which is obviously worth mountains of gold. Yeah, Crow. True. Ability drain or attribute drain or direct damage from monsters is just absolutely horrifying. It's just the worst experience. I mean, it's great. It's better than experience drain, which is just the worst. It's actually not fun. Now, one thing, this is what I really, really like. Because you're going to have a huge pool of dice, what I was deciding is that you can actually choose to target different creatures with different amounts of dice. So say you're rolling 6 dice, and there are 3 creatures. You can say, I'm going to do two dice on that guy, 2 dice on this guy, and 2 dice on that third guy. Without having to give yourself extra attacks, you can just split your dice however you want. So if you only have 1 die, you can only attack 1 guy. But if you have 2 dice, you can either use both on 1 guy or split them 1 and 1. If you have 3 dice, you can do all 3 on 1 guy, 2 on 1 guy, 1 on another, or 1, 1, and 1, right? So the number of dice you have, the stronger you are, the better your weapon, the more brawn you have, the more enemies you can kind of slice through in a turn because you can target multiple enemies. That also adds some interesting choice, right? Well, I really got to kill that orc, so I'm going to put all of my dice into him, even though there's also 2 goblins in the room. Or you're like, well, I think I can handle him, so I'm going to do 2, 2, and 2 because I'd like to kill them all quickly, and I think I can handle those odds, right? So there's some interesting choice there as well. The number of dice you have is essentially the number of attacks you have. And you can just choose how to focus them. Yeah, so DG, you're going to see axes. Axes explode hits. That's the way I'm thinking about axes. I'm going to come to that in a minute here. But anyway, so you have to decide how you're going to divide your dice against different enemies. And then you attack. And then you roll individually. And most monsters probably don't have defense dice, so if you hit them, they take the damage, and maybe they might have a hit point or 2, in which case they just die. But then some monsters might have armor, in which case you knock that down, unless it's direct damage. Some monsters might have defense dice, in which case they can roll to try to block your damage. Then it's the monster's turn. And to keep it simple, I just have all of the enemies attack together. And you just get 1 defense roll against all of them. Because if they swarm you, right, if there's like 5 goblins, each of them gets 1 attack. Well, that's 5 dice they're hitting you with, and then you just roll 1 defense die set against that whole wave. You don't get individual defense against individual attacks. Because I want this to go pretty fast. So you're rolling all your dice, and then the monsters die, and then they roll all of their dice, and you have to try to defend against them all at once. So again, the idea, I wanted to emphasize that this is a solo game. It's you against a horde of creatures. So you're defending against all of them at once. So I think that's super cool. But a character's solo, and so in order to give you better defense there, monsters only block, if they have a defense die, they only block on a 6. You block on a 5 or 6. That's how that works. And finesse is added to your defense roll. So that's what finesse is in combat. Finesse is also defense. So you roll 1 die for defense automatically, and then you get an extra die for every finesse point. So it doesn't add to your attack, it adds to your defense. Again, I think that's super cool. So again, to sum up, and I have this in the blog, you have the sum up of each. You have combats, use many d6s. Finesse is not added to attack rolls. Attacks are made by rolling d6 plus, which is a number of d6 equal to 1, plus brawn, plus weapon dice, plus any miscellaneous advantage. That's right, Frederick. And I'm also going to probably give extra brawn is also extra hit points. So basically, you're going to get an extra hit point for every extra brawn point you have too. So brawn is attack and more health. And then armor is like temporary hit points on top of that. And then defense is agility, basically. Yeah, defense is finesse. So far, again, I've been using this basic mechanic without going into anything else, without going into talent trees or equipment or anything, and it's been super fun. You can run this, just come up with some basic monsters, and you can run this as a totally passable combat game, and it's actually quite fun. Because you just see how far you can go with just this basic mechanic. But once you start to get into weapons and stuff like that, I'm super into it. Weapons are great. So I was trying to think of how to do weapon types. And I was like, look, it seems like there should be 3 types, right? Because in my mind, I can picture a dagger, like a Zweihander, right? And then like an arming sword or like a short sword or long sword or something in the middle. And those should be 3 different kinds of weapons, right? I mean, those shouldn't just all be the same. So I had, okay, light, medium, and heavy. And that's what most RPGs do, right? Most RPGs have like 3 categories, simple, martial, or exotic, or something like that. Like they have 3 types of weapons. So that each of those simply adds another dice. So light weapons are 1, medium weapons are 2, heavy weapons are 3. Extra dice to attack. And that's a pretty simple, straightforward way of doing weapons. So, and then I have a consideration of should a weapon be considered automatically? How's that work? I decided that it's always going to be, your equation is going to be 1 plus brawn plus weapon. And then the weapon types are, again, light, medium, and heavy. Light adds 1 die, medium adds 2, heavy adds 3. But then I decided I wanted to do weapon categories, like swords, axes, hammers, and polearms. And each of those has the 3 types, light, medium, and heavy. So you can have a light piercing weapon, a medium heavy weapon, piercing weapon, or a heavy piercing weapon. You can have a light slashing weapon, a medium slashing weapon, or a heavy slashing weapon. So those 3 categories apply to each type of weapon. So then each type of weapon does something. So if you want, and that's kind of what I figured out there. So bladed weapons allow you to reroll 1s in your attack. So if you're using a sword, it's more precise. If you're using a dagger, it's more precise. You're re-rolling, right? So if you miss, if you roll a 1, maybe it's a 1 and a 2, but at least if you roll a 1, you're re-rolling that. So you're more likely to get those successes. Edged explode. So axes, right? You get those huge swings. If you get lucky, 5s and 6s, you roll again, and they add those together. So if you get a 5 and a 6, you get to roll again. If you get another 5 and a 6, you roll again. So axes are like the full power. They're not as reliable, because you might roll a 1 and then you've rolled a 1. You don't get to re-roll it. Whereas if you have a blade, you get to re-roll that 1. So blades are more reliable. Axes are more smashy. They do those exploding damage. Blunted, and this is where I was thinking like a mace. This is where the player can basically use a lever to reduce an enemy's armor quickly. So blunted weapons, I said it ignores damage reduction because I hadn't yet figured out what damage reduction is, but later on I decide blunted weapons, each hit counts as 2 hits against armor. So it's a way of you switch to your mace and you smash through a heavily armored enemy quickly because it's going to do twice as much damage. It's times 2 damage against armor. Not against hit points, but against armor. And then reach, because I wanted to simulate reach is the enemy's got to get to you. Reach weapons just auto hit 1 monster who attacks the hero each round. So if you use a reach weapon, you're just going to get an automatic hit every round. And the monster might just die, might take a damage, might get a defense die against it. And I like all of these. So I can see why, and I can certainly see certain talents or things that let you make these even better, right? So I can see this getting crazy with the talent rolls that you go or the talent builds that you do. And you could make this super, super cool. But there's enough variety in the kinds of weapons that you can really start to do some fun stuff here. Because again, if I want to do a medium reach weapon, well, then that's going to be like a spear, maybe. And that means I'm going to be rolling 2 extra dice for my attack, and I get 1 auto hit on the monster when they attack me. Or I can do a heavy edged weapon, and that's 3 extra dice on the swing, and 5s and 6s explode. So anyway, I love this. I think this is really cool. But the question is, right, why don't you always just take heavy weapons? So then I had to put in some limitations. And the limitations are a hero can only carry a number of weapons equal to 1 plus his brawn. So if you have 0 brawn, you're only taking 1 weapon. And heavy weapons are considered to be 2 weapons. So you can only carry a heavy weapon if you have a brawn. So if you're doing a finesse build, you're not going to take a heavy weapon. You can't. Unless you put a few points into brawn anyway. So again, I think there's a lot of balancing to be done here. But the basic ideas are really cool. And again, I've been trying this out and it's been super fun. So anyway, I like this a lot. So you can only carry a number of heavy weapons or a number of weapons equal to your brawn plus 1. Heavy weapons are considered to be 2 weapons for the purposes of weapons carried. And then the question was, okay, well, why use a light weapon instead of a medium one? Because mediums do 2, light just does 1, and there's no other requirement. So why would you ever use a light weapon? And I decided to add finesse there. So I said, okay, well, light weapons can either use finesse or brawn, whichever's higher. So in other words, light weapons do get to use finesse, but then you can't use brawn for that attack roll. So if you're doing a finesse build, then you can take a light weapon and you'll get some benefit from it. Otherwise, you're just going to want to use a medium weapon if possible, because it's the best of the non-two-handed, basically, weapons. Yeah, Crow, I think so. Thank you. I think that makes sense. Yeah, exactly, DG. Well, once you see what finesse can do, though, I think you might change your mind, because finesse is super cool in these maneuvers that I'm thinking about. But yeah, for now, it's like I'm just going to crush my enemies with, heavy weapon axe. I'm not even going to use a shield. I'm just going to go in with my axe and just crush the enemy. It'd be great. Okay, Now shields, how am I going to do shields? Well, I think shields, I like the idea of shields being active defense rather than passive defense, right? So armor is passive defense. If you get hit, you get hit. But shields are more active. You got to actually like move them. So to simulate that, shields are added to your defense dice. So you have 1 defense die plus whatever finesse points you have, plus 2 if you have a shield. So shields give you 2 extra defense dice. But shields take up a weapon slot. Exactly, DG. You have a little skill, but not much. So shields take up a weapon slot. That means if you have 0 brawn, you can't take a shield unless you don't have a weapon. So you're probably not going to go that way unless you're doing an entire spell build, right? You could do an entire spell build where you're like, look, I'm not going to take a weapon. I'm just going to carry a shield and go all in on my spell casting. Then I can put my shield in front of me, defend myself a little bit, and cast spells from behind my shield. You could totally do that. But you could also be like, well, I'm going to put 1 point into brawn, do a little sword and shield action, and then also have my spells to back me up. But we'll get to spells later, or I'll get to spells later. So a shield counts as 1 weapon. And also, I don't know if you guys have ever encountered that OSR rule. It's called shield shall be splintered. That's kind of like the generic name for it. But the idea is in OSR games, a character can decide their shield breaks and they immediately cancel all damage that attack or that round. The same thing's true here. So shields they give you 2 defense dice every round. But after the damage is about to come through, so you roll your dice, and if you're like, uh-oh, I'm about to get wrecked, you can have your shield shatter and count all of those hits as misses that round. But then your shield's gone. Yeah, exactly, Crow. That's what I was just talking about. Just talking about the sundering shield. So the idea is shield shall be splintered. You can choose to break your own shield and cancel all the damage that round. Then your shield's gone. So it's like, okay, I can have this reliable 2 additional defense dice every round, or I can break it. But now I don't have a shield. Granted, you could take a backup shield, but then that's another weapon slot you've wasted on your shield, right? Yeah, there you go, Crow. So again, I think this is super balanced, and I think it's really fun. You can go sword and shield. If you have a lot of brawn, right? If you have 3 brawn, that means you have 4 weapons you can hold. So that's a heavy weapon, a medium weapon, and a shield. Or a heavy weapon and a medium weapon and another medium weapon for different situations, right? You might have an axe for when you just need to deal massive damage quickly, and you might have a polearm for when you have a lot of little health enemies that you just want to kill one automatically every round with that auto attack. So you can pick your equipment, and that's going to change the way that you approach each of the different monster encounters. But what's cool is that if you do want one of each type of weapon, that means you have to take 4 max weapons. Yeah, you could. That's right, DG. You could take 2 heavy weapons if you had 3 brawn, which I'm thinking is the max. I think the abilities go from 0 to 3. So if you put 3 brawn, that would be, you'd have 2 heavy weapons and then no shields and no other weapons. So you could do it. I don't know if you can do them at once. That's the thing. I think I should probably clarify. You can only use 1 type of weapon each round. I think that's probably right. But hey, take it and do it, dude. If you want, like, you could totally hack it. I might include like an optional rule, like, hey, if you really want to do the 2-handed Zweihander dual wielding, go for it. It'll just unbalance the basic math. But who cares if it's unbalanced? Just throw more enemies at you. Yeah, balance is not. I mean, I'm going for a basic balance between the builds. I'm not going for balance between the builds and the enemies. Because if you die on the first encounter, we'll just try again. If you die on the 50th encounter after, piling up the enemies and you're fighting 3 dragons at once, well, that's awesome. That's epic. So do what you like there. Okay, then armor. So armor was what I talked about earlier. Armor will add armor points. And I basically talk about different ways of doing it. Hey, little DM. How you doing, man? Great to have you. Fellow mages are always welcome. So again, armor adds armor points based on its type. So light armor gives you 4 AP, medium armor gives you 8, heavy armor gives you 12. And those are basically additional hit points. So if you start with 5 hit points at level 1 and you take heavy armor, well, that's going to be, almost tripling your hit points. Over tripling your hit points. That's a huge deal. So there's got to be some trade-off, right? And the trade-off is this. Heavy armor restricts your usable finesse to 1. So for all mechanical purposes, all game purposes, your finesse is max of 1. You can't use 2 finesse or 3 finesse if you have heavy armor. So it really limits you there. And that includes out of combat. Your finesse is just not, you can't, you're wearing full plate and gauntlets. You can't really take them off to pick the lock. It's like you're locked into that heavy armor. So it's going to restrict your finesse out of combat. And it's also going to restrict your in-combat finesse. So it's just heavy armor, 12 extra AP, but it really limits you if you're doing a finesse build at all. But if you're not doing a finesse build, if you're going straight brawn or straight brawn and wit, then hey, go with heavy armor. And I like the idea of a heavily armored caster. Basically a paladin, right? You can totally do that if you want. And then in order to use brawn, medium armor at all, you have to have a brawn of at least 1. So that's the limitation there. Brawn and heavy armor, you need at least 1 brawn. Medium and heavy armor, you need at least 1 brawn. And heavy armor restricts your usable finesse to 1. So there's limitations there. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to go with heavy armor every time. No, heavy armor only works with certain builds, and you need at least a little brawn to do it. And that's where I say here, blunted hits each count as 2 hits when reducing an enemy's AP. So again, I think this is super cool. Armor and equipment is a great part of this game so far. I've had a ton of fun taking different approaches, right? I'm going to try, a heavy axe this time. Or I'm going to try, mace and shield so I can get past those high AP enemies because they keep killing me or whatever it is. Anyway, I think that's cool. And then finally, I talked about, this is the last one I just posted today on the blog. And this is where I talk about the idea of what I mean by builds. And what I wanted to avoid is what I've seen in some games which talk about builds. And you see this with games like World of Warcraft a little bit, or games like Diablo even, where you have a different build, but in practice, you do the same thing. It looks different, but it's actually the same thing. And I compare it to this, right? If you have a very simple game, you had a D6 game, melee attacks roll the D6, ranged attacks use the D6, arcane use the D6, and divine uses the D6. It's just you need different numbers in order to hit with those different approaches. It's really, those are technically different builds, but in practice, what are you doing? You're picking up a D6 and you're rolling it and trying to get a set of 3 numbers. So in practice, it's exactly the same. And that's my problem with a lot of quote-unquote build games, is that they look different. But ultimately, they end up being and playing exactly the same. You just call what you're doing different names. In Diablo, if you play the barbarian or you play the thief, you end up doing the same actual mechanical thing, which is clicking and moving around the field and clicking quickly and using, some abilities in some combination. Now that has a little bit more to it, just about spacing and distance and timing and aiming and things like that. But in World of Warcraft, it's a good example. Like, what's the practical mechanical difference, play difference, between a warrior at low levels, at least, right? A warrior and a mage. Well, in both cases, you are using abilities at certain time and watching your bars go up or down. There's no different approach. That obviously changes as you level up, right? You start to do things like taunting, and you're trying to stay close to enemies and keep them off your allies, I should say. And right, mages are trying to play the game differently, and there's definitely skill once you start to get past that initial approach. But if you look at the game early on, it just every build is the same. So I wanted to avoid that. So how do I do that? Well, if you think about the archetypes, right? Fighters, thieves, and wizards, leaving clerics aside. But fighters, thieves, and wizards, what are the archetypes? Well, fighters are consistent. Their strengths are always on, right? Like, a fighter never has to build up or prepare. He's just the same. Every fight. He shines in the same situations, and he's not good in the same situations, and there's not much choice except for which enemy to attack and which one to be hit by, right? Like, fighters are consistent. Thieves are tactical, so they're situational, but they can always use their abilities, right? If you have shadows, the thief can always strike from shadows. If you have a backstab, the thief can always backstab. He doesn't do it a certain number of times a day. He can just do it. So thieves are tactical and situational, but they're reliable. And then finally, you have wizards. Wizards are strategic, right? You have a limited amount of ammunition, and you have to conserve it for the right time. Okay, so those are the 3 styles. And I want brawn, finesse, and wit to feel like that. So how do I do that? Well, brawn is applied every time, right? It's applied to every attack. Brawn is reliable. You pick brawn, you're going to run into the room and kill enemies. Hit them. What about finesse? Well, I decided to do something called maneuvers. Finesse give you maneuvers, and maneuvers are things you can use every fight, but only once per fight. So in other words, you get a bunch of maneuver dice and you roll them, and those are the cool special things you get to do in that combat, but you have to choose when to do them in that combat. But the next combat, you get them all again, you roll again. So in other words, fighters are round by round, thieves are encounter by encounter. Finesse gives you abilities that you can use multiple times per encounter. It's sort of like, well, in 4th edition, you would call them encounter powers, right? So fighters have at-will powers, thieves have encounter powers, and wizards use daily powers, you might say. Wit gives you dice that you only roll them at the beginning of the dungeon, and they never get re-rolled. They're your spells, and so as you use them up, they don't come back. Whereas fighters, they never have to worry about, or I shouldn't say fighters, right? Because it's not about the class, it's about the ability. If you put a lot of points into brawn, those points are going to be reliable. You just bring them in anytime you want them. But if you put a lot of points in finesse, those are encounter reliable. But once you've used them in that encounter, you can't use them again in that encounter. And so it's going to be a different approach. If you put a bunch of finesse, you're going to be more cagey. You're going to think round by round, encounter by encounter, instead of just rolling dice and killing enemies. You have to be a little bit more strategic. And then wizards, right? If you put points into wit, you have these very powerful spells, very powerful abilities, but once you use them, you've lost that spell for good, at least until you go back to town and rest or something. So it's like, well, if I'm going to put a bunch of points into wit, it's going to change the way I play. I don't know. Does that make sense to everybody? I want the feeling of them to feel different, the approach to feel different. So if you put points into brawn, it feels consistent. If you put points into finesse, it feels strategic, but situational. And if you put points into wit, it feels very, very strategic. Or I should say, yeah, tactical for finesse, strategic for the wit. So you'll get finesse dice, maneuver dice. This is what I have here. If I go to my little document here, and I go down to finesse, maneuvers. So each point of finesse grants you 3 maneuver dice. Maneuver dice are rolled at the start of each combat and can be used at any time in that combat. Any unused maneuver dice are discarded at the end of that combat. The maneuvers are, you can use any maneuver die to re-roll any attack or defense die, just one of them. So in other words, you can always use your maneuver to just re-roll one of your dice. That's it. But then what you've rolled also allows you to do something else. So a 1 on the maneuver die allows you to grant disadvantage to all monster attacks against you that round, right? You're being sneaky, you're dodging around, you're keeping distance from the enemy. All monster attacks have disadvantage against you. So you might say, well, that's obviously you use that first round, but maybe not. Maybe the kind of monster you're facing does something really cool round 3. And so you want to save that up for round 3 because you know, oh, he's going to get his super attack on round 3 and I have to face that. So I'm going to hold on to that disadvantage to that round. The second is your hits explode this round. So that could be really, really useful, right? For any build, but if you're doing a finesse build, that lets you have one big round of smashing your enemy, especially if you're using a sword. Because now, or a dagger, right? Because now you get to reroll 1s. You're more likely to get that 5 or 6, and those 5s and 6s explode. Sorry, if you guys can hear that, there's someone mowing the lawn outside. Happy Friday, Simon. 3 is you force one monster to make their attacks against another monster this round. That's like, that's the idea. Like you're getting into the combat, they both swing at you, and you like parry one of their blades into the other one, basically. You're forcing them to turn their attacks on another enemy. 4 is your defense rolls have advantage this round. So that's if you're about to get swarmed, right? If you're about to get swarmed with a bunch of hits, guaranteed hits, you know you're going to get hit. Right? Granting disadvantage to the monster attacks is really useful if there are a few attacks. Granting your defense rolls advantage is good if there are going to be a lot of attacks. And then 5 is you ignore all armor on the next attack you make. That's the backstab, right? That's finding the little chink in the armor and getting it in. And then 6, if you roll a 6 on your maneuver die, you can use any maneuver. So the fact is you can combine these as well, right? If you're going to roll 3 maneuver dice, say you have 1 point of finesse, you're going to roll all 3 at the beginning of combat. You roll a 1, a 4, and a 5. Well, now you can grant disadvantage once. You can ignore all your defense rolls of advantage, and you could ignore AP. Well, say there are no monsters with AP in that combat. Well, then you can always use that 5 as a reroll. I don't know. Does that make sense to folks? This makes finesse really useful. You can use this basically to have, I don't know, an entirely different approach to combat. Because you're going to get a whole bunch of maneuvers, and those maneuvers are going to let you be very, very strategic. Now, as long as you have a die or two, if you're going to have, use a medium weapon, say, no brawn, but a medium weapon, that's still going to be 3 attack dice. And 3 attack dice with these finesse abilities can still allow you a lot of variety and a lot of being pretty tricksy. Especially when you consider that finesse also grants you defense, and it's useful outside of combat for all the tests. So I think this is a really cool way of making finesse actually useful again. But that leaves wit. And wit in Magic is something I haven't even gone into yet at all. And of course, that also leaves talents aside. I haven't done talents or talent trees, basically feats. I haven't done any of that stuff either, or developing monsters. I've done a few basic monsters like goblins and orcs, skeletons, but I haven't done anything beyond that. And so there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. But I think as a base system, this is super cool. And so far, the rules fit right there. That's the whole game. Most of that is over-explanation as well. So you actually don't need a whole bunch of rules. It's very straightforward. Once you learn the basic mechanic and you get yourself equipped, then the game is really fast. Now, granted, I haven't put in talents and I haven't put in magic. Yeah, Crow, hope you have a good rest of your day. Have a great weekend. So that's kind of what I got to do now. That's what I was going to work on today. I know this is about like 40 minutes, basically. A little bit more than 40 minutes, almost an hour. Yeah, almost an hour of recap of the system. But that's basically what it is. And magic is going to be where I have to go next. So like I said, I'm going to do a quick little, there we go. I'm going to do a quick set of spells. And really what I need to figure out first is how many spell dice and how the spell dice mechanics work. And that is something I have not figured out yet at all. I have not yet gone through spell dice. I'm thinking something like, well, there's really two ways of doing it. One is you roll all your spell dice at the start of the dungeon, and you get a certain set of numbers, and then you have access to every spell. And those spells require certain numbers to cast, right? So like, a 1 lets you cast Charm Person or Charm Monster. A 2 lets you cast Web. A 3 lets you cast that sort of thing. 2 6s let you cast a Fireball, right? And so you could use different numbers and combinations of numbers to cast different spells, but you have access to the whole spell book. That's one way of approaching it. Another is to take a page out of the Mouse Ritter book and have the dice be more, or have the spells be more what you plug into them, right? Spells, they're more what you plug into them. So the spells are like deal dice damage to some creatures or some damage to dice creatures, right? Some being the sum of the dice you've plugged in. I could see either of those being totally legitimate approaches. I guess there's a third way of approaching it too. And that would be to do something like, if you guys have ever played Dicey Dungeon, which is a great game. Dicey Dungeon is a video game, but one of the things that the caster build there does is you plug certain spells into certain slots. You choose. So you say what happens when you roll a 6, which spell goes off. You say what happens when you roll a 5. And then there are ways of manipulating the dice themselves. That's pretty complicated. And one of the reasons that works is because you have the engine in the video game to do it for you, all the math. Just you plug the die into its slot and it does the math for you there. So that's a little complicated to do for this. But I think something like either the Mouse Ritter approach or just set dice inputs with set outputs. So what do I mean exactly? Like this. Any one spell die may be used to cast magic missile, or magic shield. So magic missile, magic shield are super reliable. Magic missile deals 1 direct damage, and direct damage goes right through armor. Ignoring defense dice. So magic missile just deals 1 damage, automatically, always, reliably, but it costs 1 of your spell dice. And there are probably more efficient ways to use spell dice than that. Whereas magic shield deals, again, I actually have that, auto blocks 1 hit. Magic shield blocks 1 hit. Yeah, auto blocks. I'll just put it there. I already put it up above. But... okay, so that's an example of what I mean. Let me quickly go like this. Boom. Okay. And now what would be another, I'm going to widen this a little bit here as well. You do like fireball. Fireball, or what should I say here? It'd be like this. 2 6s may be used to cast fireball. And fireball deals what? D3 damage to all creatures. Deal D3 direct damage to all monsters. Something like that. Right, does that make sense to everybody? What I'm thinking there? So you have a certain number of magic dice. You roll them at the beginning of the dungeon, and those are going to have certain face values. You roll. Say you roll 10 dice. Those are your spell dice, and you have in those 10 dice. I'll roll 10 dice here so I can have an example here. You have 2 6s. You have 1 5, 2 4s, 3 3s, 4 3s, and a 2. Those are the spells. Those are the numbers that you can then put into the different spells. So in order to cast Fireball, I have to use those 2 d6s. So I know that I can cast a Fireball once because I happen to have 2 6s that I rolled in those 10 dice. But I also know that I could just cast 10 magic missiles over the course of the adventure. I think something like that works. That's pretty cool. Now the other approach is to do something like this. This is the mouse ritter approach. That's where Fireball is something like this. Deal, what would that be? Nope. Some damage to dice something like dice, creatures, monsters. Yeah, there we go. I can spell. Okay. This is a different approach because this means that I say, okay, how many dice am I going to use in my Fireball? Well, if I use 1 die, well, then that's just 1 die. That's like only 1 monster is going to get hit by it. And then I roll it, and whatever I roll, that's how much damage. I happen to roll a 2. But if I use 2 dice to power that spell, well, then it's going to happen to 2 monsters. And I roll those dice together, and I just rolled a 7. That's 7 damage to 2 monsters. And I could just power it up massively. I could do 3 dice. And then that would hit 3 monsters, and I just did 10 damage to 3 monsters. Because I roll them all together and add up the sum, and that's the damage that I deal. So I could see either approach working just fine. I don't know. Any thoughts, guys? Those of you who are still here? On the one hand, I think, just using the mouse ritter mechanic is kind of a cop-out. If I'm building my own system, I should try to build my own system. But it's certainly a lot easier than putting particular numbers with particular spells. On the other hand, well, I don't know. This is what I'm going to have to think about and what I'll have to probably play test a bit to make sure that it's as good as melee builds. Yeah, for sure. It's the trickiest. Magic is always the trickiest part of your system. At least I think. It's the one that matters the most because it's the one that feels the most, it's the one that feels the most fantastical. So what would I do there to make this a little easier? Well, what are the upsides and downsides of each? There we go. Let's think about that. What are the upsides and downsides of each? Well, the upsides of doing magic the first way. Yeah, so quest for quest. That's a good question. Do I plan on doing mishaps for spells? I hadn't planned on it. I think the downside of picking spells is that they have a very limited window of use. I mean, once you use them, they're gone. So I think I'm inclined to say they're reliable, but gone. Once you use them, that's the downside, is that they're limited in that way, reliable but gone. So I would say probably no. I don't think I'm going to do mishaps. I think you could probably program drawbacks into a particular spell. So like Fireball deals some damage to dice monsters, for example, and then I could just say brawn test or take 1 HP, right? So like you're blowing up the whole room unless you succeed on that brawn test. Hero must, yeah. So you could do things like that. You could implement drawbacks to particular spells. You wouldn't have to make it be a universal, all spells have a chance of failure. Or you could do something like if you did the Mouse Ritter, where it's like deal some damage to dice monsters. If you roll the lowest number, right, on those damage, then it does damage to you, or maximum. If you happen to roll maximum damage, if you happen to roll 2 6s, well then you have to make a test or take some damage too. So you could add that in again. So there's a lot of flexibility there in the way that individual spells are balanced. Okay, so let's think about those upsides. What are the upsides of using the former? It seems like the former way of doing it limits your choice a bit, right? Because you roll your dice at the beginning. Yeah, well, that's actually what I was thinking about. The Mouse Ritter way. Okay, let me finish my thought. If you do the former, then what you're really doing is you're rolling all your dice at the start of a dungeon, which I like. You know, as a player, you know what you can cast right then, and you have access to all of the dice when you start. As you start using those dice, the sorts of spells you can then cast starts to narrow because you're using up your ammunition. So if Fireball takes 2 d6s, for example, or 2 6s, for example, and, I don't know, Invisibility takes 1 6, and you only roll 2 6s, well, then you know you can either cast Invisibility twice or Fireball once. And if you cast Fireball, well, then now you can't cast Invisibility. And if you cast Invisibility once, the only thing you can use that d6 on is a Fireball or on a Magic Missile. So you might as well use it there. So I like that. I like the fact that you get all of your spells initially. You know all of your resources. You know what you can cast that approach to the dungeon that time. But you're limited. You can't cast just any spell because you're limited to the number of dice, to what you rolled. And if certain spells just require certain numbers in order to be powered, like if you don't happen to roll a 6 or 2 6s, you just can't cast Fireball. That's pretty rough. If you do the Mouse Ritter way, then you don't roll the dice initially. You just have a certain pool of dice, say 10 dice, that you can cast throughout the dungeon. And then you can choose how much to use at any one time. I'm going to use 1 on this spell. I'm going to use 3 on this spell. But once you've used that, then it's gone. Exactly, quest for quest. That's what I was thinking. That's why I like this mechanic, because it sounds like actually describing what the ability is, which is wit. You're exactly right. You literally have to use your wits and manage your dice pool through the whole dungeon. So I think that former is better. On the other hand, what you could say is you roll all... Actually, you roll all... How about this? You roll all your dice, your spell dice, when you enter the dungeon. And those are the numbers that you can then use. But then you can choose how many to use or how many to plug in to the Mouse Ritter system. So spells still do the sum dice thing, but you choose which ones to plug in. So I'm going to use, so say I rolled 10 dice. Wow, okay, I rolled again. I got 3 1s, 1 6, 2 6s, 4 5s, and a 3. That's pretty high. I could choose to use 2 1s to power Fireball. And that would be 2 monsters take 2 damage. Or I could choose to use 2 6s to power Fireball. And that's 2 monsters take 12 damage. But now I've used up my 6s. That's an interesting kind of middle ground. You know all the dice at the start of the dungeon, so you have them. That's what you're going to have for that dungeon, for that run. But particular spells don't require particular dice. That seems better. That still gives you more choice. That way, you could still use Fireball with 1 die. It's just, if you use a 1, it's going to be 1 damage to 1 monster. It's basically a magic missile. Or you could use 6. I use a 6, and that's 6 damage to 1 monster. Okay, I think I like that. Fireball deals some damage to dice monsters. So then the question is coming up with spells that use the sum dice mechanic. And also deciding how many magic dice you get per point of wit. That's a good question. I think it has to be at least 5. Because if you think about it, right, Brawn is probably going to get you through, well, it has to be at least a reasonable choice to pick a wit build. Or to put points into wit rather than into Brawn or finesse. So maybe 6 dice. 6 spell dice per point of wit. That means if you did max out, you'd have 18 spell dice, which is quite a lot of power. But that's assuming you had 3 wit. And that assumes that you were able to just focus all entirely on that. You wouldn't have any armor. Really, you'd have light armor. You wouldn't have any major attack. And so once you ran out of magic, you'd be really, really in trouble. And you're going to run through those 18 dice pretty quickly. I think 6 spell dice per point of wit is a good idea. Brawn gives you 1 extra attack for each brawn point. Finesse gives you 3 maneuver dice for each point of finesse. Wit gives you 6 spell dice per point of wit. I like that. Okay. And again, this would be about balance and playing through and seeing if it works. But for now, I think this is what I'll do. I'll post this document, by the way, guys, to the notes or to the resources at the end here. If anybody wants to start playing this or testing this, let me know. I mean, you can just do it. You don't have to worry about it. If you'd be interested in that, that would be super cool. Having more people testing it would be really cool. And seeing what works and what doesn't, what's overpowered and what isn't. Coming up with your own monsters and, seeing if those work. Yeah, so I think the ways that you're going to be replenishing resources are going to be pretty negligible. So spell dice are not going to come back unless there's like an event in the dungeon, right? See, one of the rooms in the dungeon might be like, a blessed pool. And if you drink from it, you can roll a d6 and that's how many spell dice you recover. But there's not going to be an automatic way of getting your spell dice back. Finesse dice come back at the start of every fight, and brawn dice never go away. Hit points are probably only going to be replenished by magic or through like healing potions or, again, events in the dungeon. But it's not going to be like a standard thing. Once your hit points and armor start to go down, they're not going to go up very often. So it's really about how far can you go while your resources are being depleted. How many fights can you handle? How many combats can you get through while your resources are going down? So again, it'll be a matter of balance here and trying to find the right balance of coming back, finding a way of replenishing a couple of spell dice here, or getting some hit points back there, or repairing your armor a little bit there. I haven't yet talked about equipment, so that's one thing I haven't actually figured out yet, how non-combat equipment is going to be dealt with. Carrying capacity, how torches are going to be done, how rations are going to be done, if you have like an armor repair kit, how that would work. I haven't yet gone into any of that stuff. But I could see all of those being pieces of equipment you could carry with you. Healing potions, rations, torches, armor repair kits, things like that. Oh, one thing I didn't talk about is ranged attacks, ranged combat. That's another thing too. I actually do want to include ranged combat, and this I'm basically taking straight up. It's a combination of, Dungeon Quest and Warhammer 40k. So in Dungeon Quest, one of the characters has a bow, and he starts with 4 arrows. And the way that the bow works in Dungeon Quest, which is a board game, is that you can choose to fire your bow at the start of combat, and you just roll. And if you actually, I think in that you draw a card. I think that's it. It's not even a roll. I think you might roll. But regardless, it's like you just have a chance of dealing damage before the battle begins. So here, what I was thinking is this. If your hero is not surprised and you happen to have a bow, you can use one of your pieces of ammunition and roll a single d6. You look at their armor points. If they have armor that's equal to your finesse, then it's just straight up roll. 5 or 6 succeeds. If their armor is lower than your finesse, so if you happen to have a finesse point and they don't have any armor, then you have advantage. If their armor is higher than your finesse, so you have 0 finesse and they happen to have an armor point, then you have disadvantage on that shot. But if you hit them, then they take D3 direct damage to their health, not their armor. So you skip their armor. And then hit or miss, you can choose to fire another arrow immediately. And you can do that until either you choose not to shoot or until you're out of ammo. So it's like as the monsters are moving towards you, you're firing off a few arrows. That sounds pretty powerful because it's like free chances to hit, but a ranged weapon takes up a weapon slot. And only 5 pieces of ammo come with that weapon. Any additional ammo would take up another weapon slot, up to increments of 5. So if you want to take 10 arrows, that's 2 weapon slots. 1 for the bow and the free 5 arrows, 1 for the additional 5 arrows. So this is not something that you would bring with you and rely entirely on. If you do, you're not going to make it very far because you're only going to get... It's like, okay, if I want a ranged weapon to take out those really deadly creatures that are going to... before they get to me, then you can take a bow. But it takes a weapon slot. And it tags off of finesse, but it takes a weapon slot, which means you need higher brawn in order to even carry it. So I think it's actually a pretty cool balance. It's a very powerful thing, firing those ranged attacks before combat begins. But you can't rely on it. You're not going to get arrows back. They're like spells in that way. You kind of just have to know when you should use them and when you shouldn't. So it adds an interesting choice point. But if you happen to have, 1 point of brawn, then you can take a bow and a longsword or something like that. And you have variation between the two. You could do a finesse build, finesse brawn build where you go, high finesse, just a point of brawn or something like that. And bring a bow and a longsword. And that can be pretty cool. Okay, well, let's see. I've been going for about an hour and 20. Most of this was just kind of going through my notes, but I do think I've come to a couple cool decisions here. One is this idea of spell dice. I think the way it's going to work is that you're going to roll all of your spell dice. 6 spell dice per point of wit is going to be where I start. So if you have 2 wit, you get 12 spell dice. You're going to roll those right at the beginning of the dungeon. But each spell is not going to require any particular number to trigger. Rather, your spells are going to have a sum dice mechanic like they do in Mouse Ritter. And that means it's up to you to decide which dice to use for the perfect situation. Okay, I'm going to use my 1s here because I just need a little bit of damage. So I'm going to cast a fireball with 2 1s. And that means I'm only going to hit 2 monsters, but I'm only going to do 2 damage to each. But that's okay, because I just need to kill these goblins really quickly. So I'm going to use a little fireball. But okay, now I'm facing off with a big, scary set of monsters. I'm going to roll 2 d6s. Or I'm going to use 2 6s, and that's going to be 12 damage to these 2 monsters. That's a ton of damage. It'll probably kill them, unless they're really, really tough or something like that. I like that. So then it's just a matter of coming up with spells. And if anybody wants to come up with a list of spells using these basic rules, let me know. If you send me an example spell, I will use it. Because at this point, I'm just going to have to come up with a list. And I want to cover the basic things. I don't think I'm going to do healing. Well, maybe should I do healing? I might do healing. We'll see. You could do a healing spell. I could see that. But again, the idea here is that at least in theory, I want a pure wit spellcaster build to make sense. And also a brawn spellcaster build to be possible. and also a finesse spellcaster build to be possible. Maybe a little bit of everything. A little bit of brawn, a little bit of finesse, a little bit of spellcaster. That at least is possible, and it might be able to get somewhere in the dungeon. So that would be cool. So yeah, I think that's just what I'm going to be doing. I think I'll probably end the recording here because that'll just be rather boring as I go through spells, unless people want to work on spells with me. But that's basically what I'll be doing, and then I'll be posting, of course, all this to the Substack where you guys can find the rest of the information here. And again, I'll also put just these documents there with all of the things compiled, so that if you want to use this game, you totally can. I've been having a ton of fun with it so far, even before I do the magic. Like I said, it's actually quite easy, because once you create your character, then all you're really looking at is monster stats. I don't yet have rules for creating and generating a dungeon, so I've just been doing battles. But you can use, lots of the solo games help you generate a dungeon. You can use 4 Against Darkness if you have that, for that part of it. I'll eventually add those in, but that's not what I'm going to be doing right now. Because you can look at monster stat blocks and they're super easy. Like if you have a goblin, it has 1 HP, 0 AP, 1 attack die, and then its special is rolls 1 defense die at advantage if there are at least 4 goblins. So that they swarm you. And they're likely to block a hit if you have they're 50% likely to block a hit if there are at least 4 goblins. So if they swarm you, but they're very simple, right? The stat block is super easy. It's just 1 hit point, no AP, 1 attack die, and then that. And every stat block can be that simple for the monsters. Orcs, right? An orc has 2 HP. Whoops. 0 AP, 2 attack dice. And its special is that when at 1 HP, rolls attack dice with advantage. Right? It's like rage. So that's it. Like you have, those are 2 stat blocks right there. Your goblins are very simple. They have a special. Basically, the idea is I want every creature to kind of have hit points, armor points, attack values, and then actually I should do this. Yeah, here. Defense. Defense die 1. Or 1 defense die. Yeah, that's what I would say here. And then orcs have maybe 1 defense die. And again, you can just do this. Makes it even easier. So the stat blocks are super simple. Goblins have 1 hit point, 0 AP, 1 attack, 1 defense, and they roll their defense die at advantage if there are at least 4 goblins in the room. Orcs have 2 hit points, 0 AP, 2 attack, 1 defense, and if they happen to have 1 hit point, they take 1 damage. Those 2 attack dice roll at advantage. So again, very, very simple. I like that. It's one of my favorite things about this whole system. Skeletons. The skeleton. 1 HP, 0 AP, 1 attack, no defense, but special, imposes disadvantage against all but blunted attacks. Right, so if you happen to be attacking with any weapon other than a blunted weapon, you have to roll a 6 to hit them. This is just like, they're not especially defensible. They don't have any defense, actually. Yeah, so 0 defense. 0 defense. But they just have this automatic, it's harder to damage them unless you're actually hitting them with a mace or a hammer. If you're just hitting them with a sword or a spear or a lance, then you're just not going to be able to hit them as easily. You're going to need that 6 to get the damage in. But then they're dead if you can do that. You just crush them, right? So if you happen to be attacking with a mace, skeletons are easy. If they're not, then they're actually quite hard. Because the odds, again, once you add disadvantage, the odds go way down. So stat blocks are super easy to generate. You can create your own creatures very quickly. And then you can use this as a battle system, even if you don't do magic very much. Awesome quest request. Yeah, let me know how it goes. Hope you do. All right, guys. Well, that's it. I'm gonna let you all go. I'm gonna get some lunch. Hope this has been fun. Have a great weekend for everybody. Have fun. I'm gonna do another live stream on Sunday, and that'll be my Dolmenwood prep because I talked to my players, and they're all on board for a Dolmenwood campaign once the school year starts. So we're probably gonna do our session 0 probably next week or the week after, And then we're going to get into a regular weekly session again starting in September. So I can't wait for that. So anyway, I'll be doing some more prep for my campaign on Sunday. All right, cool. See you guys all around.